There are 254 town meeting members, 128 constitute a quorum. We're going to debate and we'll eventually come to vote.
So I ask you to support this motion.
I see no hands. Am I missing one?
Need the community these bring together.
I was an elementary school teacher.
I think what we're hearing, two separate issues.
Public art's been an important part of this community.
I urge you to vote yes on this proposal.
Call the previous question.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. No. We'll have an electronic vote.
I move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Hello, my name is Carol Gray, and thank you for visiting our show, Conversations About Town Meeting. Town meeting is an ancient body in our town. In fact, it was first started in 1759. The first town meeting was called to order May 19th, 1759 by D. Ebenezer Dickinson. It was actually, in the early days, town meeting was called by a conch shell. Here today, we are doing this show as part of a series of programs on the importance, value, and history of town meeting. And we're very happy to have with us today Cullen, who is a UMass student who's currently running for town meeting, and Russ Vernon Jones, who is a former principal at Fort River Elementary, and I'll go into more of his background when we begin speaking with him. But we're going to start off with you, Caitlin. I know you're at UMass, and I know that you're studying very interesting things. Could you tell a little more about what your focus is at UMass, what year you are, and what you're doing outside of school?
Definitely, yeah. So I'm a junior at UMass. I am a BDIC student, stands for bachelor's degree in an individualized concentration. So it's essentially a build your own major program. You decide like your curriculum and all of that based on a proposal that you write. And my particular concentration is genetic counseling. Okay. And do you do other activities outside of your studies? Yes, I'm involved in a few intramural sports clubs for soccer, also the plant-based nutrition club, and a few other up-and-coming clubs around campus. Great. And so you mentioned your major. It sounds very complicated and interesting. What do you want to do with that major? I hope to become a genetic counselor in the prenatal area, mostly helping people trying to conceive that want to know basically what their genetics are, the chances of having children with certain genetic differences, things like that, but also just to give people as much information about their situation as possible so they can make the most informed decision. Terrific. And the outside work that you're doing outside of your studies, what does that student group do that you talked about? The Plant-Based Nutrition Club basically just informs students about plant-based diets, so like vegan, vegetarian diets, and just the social impact, environmental impact, and health impact of those. I see. And where are you from originally? I'm from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, so Central Mass. Okay. But I've lived in Amherst for 3 years. Yeah. Now, you're taking the plunge and you're running for town meeting. And what made you decide to do that? I had actually not really known that much about local government in Amherst at all. I knew from Shrewsbury that there's a town meeting and a lot happens there, and so I kind of wanted to get involved, but didn't really know how. And I met a few people in Amherst that actually informed me on all of the local government politics, basically. And I heard about the charter that was coming up and that issue, so I just figured that I would run to help diversify the town meeting and also include a student perspective, that sort of thing. And so for people who might not know what the process is to actually run for town meeting, could you just say, what did you have to do to run? It was actually so simple. I just set aside like 30 minutes out of my day, went to the town hall, walked up to the clerk window, said that I'd like to run. They handed me a sheet. They said, we need 2 signatures. And I was worried. And, and they said, we need your signature here to say that you nominate yourself, and your signature here saying that you accept your nomination. Right. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I signed twice, and that was it.
And you're on the ballot. You're a candidate.
I am. Precinct 5.
There you go. Have you ever been a candidate for anything before?
I ran for like student council and that kind of thing in high school, but never for like this level of like government.
How does that feel?
It feels really nice. I've always been an advocate for like trying to change policies and like social issues like from like the political standpoint, but now I think is my chance to actually do that for Amherst. So
yeah. And what do you think, well, which issues about town meeting are most interesting to you as a student?
I think just the fact that it is like such an accessible level of democracy for so many people. There's no cost to run, so low-income families, people in those different areas in their lives can run for this at no cost. They can have their voices heard. They can talk about things that matter to them. And I think that's also great that town meeting is 56% women. And I think that including people of color and women and students more is going to be great for Amherst.
And of the issues that we talk about in town meeting, you know, we do the budget, we do petition articles, which are issues that the citizens bring before us. So any 10 people, any 10 voters can write up a petition that they'd like town meeting to consider on a wide range of issues. So we handle a lot of different things in town meeting. Which of those issues have you heard about that you thought, well, that might be something that I would like to weigh in on?
Definitely things that affect the environment are really close to my heart. Things involving like the schools, like arts programs, things like that are really important to me.
And what things about the environment in particular?
Just making sure that Amherst stays as sustainable as its image is. And so things like the plastic bag ban, things like that are important.
Could for people who might not be aware of that, and actually Russ, feel free to jump in because Russ is also a town meeting member. What was the plastic bag ban? Could you explain a little?
Yeah, so Amherst was actually kind of like one of the forerunners in this. Shrewsbury just passed it, but it's basically not having plastic bags available at stores within the town. And then adding a fee if people want to buy paper bags. Yep. So it would encourage people to bring reusable bags and reduce their waste.
Yes, right. And also reduce plastic, which is made from oil.
Exactly.
Not great for the environment. And Russ, were you in town meeting when the plastic bag ban, I think you came a little later perhaps?
I came after the plastic bag ban, but one of the things we did most recently was vote to have zero energy public buildings required.
Right. And could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, the idea is, I mean, clearly if we're going to deal with climate change, we're going to have to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, and we're going to have to reduce our use of fossil fuels.
Right.
So the idea is that any new public building that we build will generate as much electricity over the year as it uses. So it's a net zero energy user. And, you know, mostly this is putting solar panels, you know, on the building and building a very efficient, energy efficient building.
Yep.
And what town meeting overwhelmingly agreed to was that we would start with our public buildings. And that any public building we build from now on will need to be zero energy.
Yeah, and it could be solar panels. It could also be, for example, some communities have geothermal. I think Greenfield has a geothermal building. I know when I was a library trustee, we went and we toured the North Adams Public Library, which is all run on geothermal.
That's awesome.
And yeah, I'm all for that. So that's a great example of an issue that relates to climate change. I was also thinking of there was a resolution to support carbon, the carbon tax, I believe. Were you in town meeting when that was passed?
Yeah, putting a price on carbon is widely considered one of the best ways to cut down the use of fossil fuels.
Right, and that was an example of a petition article that didn't actually mandate that the town do something, but it was a resolution saying we as a town take a position supporting the carbon tax that is being looked at nationally. Had you heard about that before, Caitlin?
Yes, definitely. And then also UMass itself was, I was part of the activism for Divest,
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
That is
so
great.
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, I sat there, got some work done, and protested fossil fuels. So that was
How
cool too.
about, well, you know, we have something in common at the table that I'm just realizing. So Russ also has not only been protesting, but has been doing civil disobedience, trying to stop the construction of a fracked gas pipeline through the Otis State Forest. And I care a lot about climate change issues too, but I was also involved with divestment 20 years ago when it was about South Africa. And we were doing civil disobedience at Wesleyan University, getting arrested right before graduation.
Nice.
So divestment has a very rich tradition and effective, hopefully.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, UMass felt the pressure, so.
So did it work? What happened with
I
your
think they
movement?
devised either a 5 or 10-year plan to like slowly over time divest fully, but even that was huge.
Yeah.
So
And clearly the result of student pressure.
absolutely.
There's no question.
Yeah,
that
a lot of students did
made
get
this
arrested,
happen.
but
That
it was
is
worth
terrific.
it. Yeah,
That
for
is
sure.
great. I'm also aware there's for our upcoming town meeting, there is a petition article to support the Paris climate change agreement. I know because my child is working on it. He's a seventh grader, and they have an environmental unit. And,
Oh, nice.
And by the way, for anyone watching this program, next week we will be taping with two of the people who worked on Chris Riddle and Andra Rose, who worked on the net zero bylaw, and that bylaw, by the way, is binding. That's not just a resolution; it is mandated that all town buildings over $1 million to build will be zero energy. And anyway, and Chris Riddle was also involved with what's called the stretch codes bylaw, which requires, I think, well, he'll talk about it next time, but I think it requires a certain level of insulation and building parameters that make things more energy efficient. And we've passed that as well. So town meetings had a number of things that were really trying to promote energy efficiency and try to save our planet.
Definitely, yes, yeah.
So thank you both for all your work on that. So Caitlin, you're a student, obviously. Do you think you're going to be able to fit in the town meeting commitment, and how will that work, and what perspective do you think you'll be able to offer as a student?
I think that mainly I can just bring good ideas or new ideas to town meeting from a student perspective, so with student interest in mind. And also I feel like the commitment is very doable. It really doesn't seem like it's going to be overloading my schedule. And it's also, I feel, going to be very rewarding to be involved at that level. So I think that it'll be worth the time that I spend.
Yeah. Do you know any other UMass students who've been in town meeting? Have you?
Yes. John, who is also in my precinct, and is running again. And then also I have a few other friends that are running for the first time.
Wow.
Carolyn Latino and Olivia Williamson, and also my friend Kit as well. So
About how many students are going to be running that you know?
I think it's somewhere between like 12 and 14.
That's
I don't know the numbers,
That's
but I think, I think it's going to be fairly representative. It's going to be
That's wonderful.
great
That's
if
just
it goes.
terrific.
Yeah.
I hopefully you get elected, and I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to have your perspective in town meeting. That'll be terrific.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So we're going to move on now to Russ, and Russ is going to talk to us a bit about something you know a whole lot about, the schools. Just to give a little background on Russ, he is a parent, a husband, a grandfather, and he had got his doctorate from UMass Amherst. And what did you study there, Russ?
Educational administration.
Of course, there you go. And he was the principal at Fort River Elementary for 18 years. He has also done a lot of anti-racism work. I was noticing that. Worked with a project called Coming Together, Understanding Racism, Working for Justice, and Building Connections. It's a multiracial project seeking to lay the groundwork for effective action to create a more equitable, interconnected, and inclusive community. I also noticed that you were a deputy field organizer for the Barack Obama presidential campaign. You have your hands in many pots here, don't you? That's terrific.
Well, they are all connected.
They are all connected, yeah. And so I'd like to have you speak for a little bit, Russ, about a very important issue that has affected our town recently, which is a vote on a school project that came before town meeting. And before we get into what you thought the important issues were in the vote, I'd like to just go over a little bit of what is the issue and what was the school project. So could you just kind of tell our listeners who may not know anything other than there was a school issue, like what is the issue what was the problem that needed to be solved, and what was the proposed solution? Could you, and Caitlin, feel free to jump in since you might be new to this. You'll be the perfect person to help us fill in the blanks.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think the thing I want to say first is that this has been a very difficult issue for our town, and I have a lot of respect for people who supported the school and people who voted against the school, and
the school proposal.
The school proposal.
Not against the schools anyway.
Nobody voted against schools.
No.
But this was a painful and divisive issue, and I think in some ways we're still healing from some of the pain that came out of this. And I, as I say, I have real respect for people on both sides, and my only interest in talking about it is that I think it's a mistake to put this out as an error or fault on the part of town meeting. Town meeting actually reflected the vote of the general populace very much.
Let me back up a bit here. So some people might not even know that there was an issue before town meeting. So the issue, the problem to be solved was that there are two elementary schools that are quite old and have issues, and I'll get into that more. But
Wildwood was built in 1970 and Fort River in 1973 on the same floor plan.
Yes.
And they were built with open space classrooms designed to have 100 students in one space, in large space, and be divided up into small groups. And it was an idealistic idea that perhaps a few teachers could pull off successfully, but in general it didn't fit with how children learn or how most teachers want to teach. And shortly after Fort River was built, teachers started putting up dividers and temporary walls and all. So we built schools in the early 70s that, according to a plan that didn't really work for children or teachers. And we've been living with the results of having made that bad decision for 4 decades since.
Right.
Those buildings are now old and in serious need of repair. The Fort River building has the additional problem of having been built on a very wet area. And moisture has been a problem in that building, I think ever since it first went up.
Yes.
So, I was principal at Fort River from 1990 to 2008.
Yes.
And back in, 2000, we started putting in requests for state funding to either dramatically renovate or to build a new school.
Yes.
And I think pretty much people are in agreement that we need either completely renovated or brand new schools to replace both Fort River and Wildwood at this point.
Right.
I think everybody is pretty much in agreement about that.
Right.
So the school committee in town created a school building committee, and there are some decisions that rest with the school building committee and some that rest with the school committee. But under the leadership of the then superintendent and administration, they came up with a proposal that was going to make a very dramatic change in elementary education in Amherst. And what they brought to the voters in the town meeting was a plan that would have built a very large school on the Wildwood site. Sometimes it was talked about as a mega school, sometimes it was talked about as 2 co-located elementary schools. And after we have had K-6 elementary education in Amherst for as long as anyone can remember, the plan would have completely demolished K-6 schools and would have eliminated neighborhood schools. So the idea was to have all students in grades, well, preschool, kindergarten, and first grade to go to the current Crocker Farm School, and have all students, you know, from the entire town, from grades 2 through 6, to go to the newly built school or schools on the Wildwood site.
And I understand this was part of, there was a survey done that looked at 4 different plans. And I will show for our viewers a slide from the survey results. And just take a moment to look at that, and I'll show to you. I believe that the result that came before town meeting was option C.
Option C was the one that they eventually brought to town meeting, which involved complete grade reconfiguration, and then the one new building.
Yeah. And do you recall whether this had, well, I actually looked at the survey results. I don't know if you know them. The numbers
I don't know
right
the
offhand.
numbers, but this survey was done fairly early in the process when there were still options, and the school committee and the school building committee could have gone in a number of different directions.
Yes.
And at the time they did this survey, the grade reconfiguration and having all students 2 through 6 go to one location was, as I remember, the least favored option by both teachers and parents.
Yes, your memory is correct. For the viewers, I will just show for the parent survey, and actually I'm a parent, so my son at the time was at Fort River Elementary, so I had the pleasure of doing the survey. And it was had wide number of people took it. Here's a slide about the responses. 451 respondents, 27% response rate, it's decent. And as you recalled, Russ, Plan C, showing this slide, Plan C for parents, it received 6% of parents ranking it as their top choice. So 94% of parents did not rank it as their top choice. For teachers, 4% of teachers ranked C as their top choice, so 96% did not. Why do you suppose option C was chosen?
Well, it certainly wasn't on the basis of that survey. There were real problems that the school district was trying to solve. One of the issues was that it appeared we could only get state funding for one building, and we really need 2 buildings.
Right.
And I think that's where they came up with the idea that they would make one large building and put 2 schools in it.
Yes.
And I think that's how that came about.
Right.
The reconfiguration, frankly, for me, is a little harder to understand. I think they felt that one of the issues was educational equity, and who are we busing in order to make our schools more balanced with regard to socioeconomic status and race. And apparently people within the administration of the schools, and they persuaded much of the school committee, came to the conclusion that the only way to do something equitably was to have all students have the same experience. So if all students in the same grade were in the same school, that would guarantee that.
Okay. Well, yes, sir, go ahead, please.
Well, every course on basic social justice or racism begins with saying that equity and sameness, equity and equality, are not always the same thing. Equality is when everybody gets the same thing. Equity is when everybody gets what they need.
We just have a couple of minutes now, but we're going to come back for a second part to this discussion. Could you discuss a little bit about, you mentioned pedagogically, you thought that this proposed new school would have been problematic. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think a researcher could cite specific research and studies and all, but my experience in schools is that a K-6 school develops, a good K-6 school develops a sense of community. And younger students look ahead to the older students and model themselves after them. We used to have a reading buddies program between the kindergarten
Yes. My son was in that.
and the sixth graders.
I had one too.
And kindergartners loved it, but sixth graders also, not only did they like doing it, but you could see a whole different side of sixth graders who were busy trying to be big and tough and the oldest in the school, and you got them with a 5-year-old and they just became these warm, caring, children. And teachers have communication back and forth. A fourth grade teacher is having trouble with a student. They go talk to the third grade teacher and the second grade teacher and say, was she like this all along, or is this a new problem that's developed? And teachers, relationships get built between families and parents and the school.
So Russ, just to clarify, so the proposal was not a K through 6. Is that right?
The proposal would have eliminated K-6 education. And the other thing I love about K-6 schools is the kind of professional community that teachers develop. And one of the things we were doing when I was at Fort River is that was most productive as we were having conversations about how do concepts develop in learners' minds and in the curriculum, starting in kindergarten, going all the way to 6th. How are you preparing students for what's going to come next? How are you building on what students had in earlier grade levels? And where is the most appropriate place to teach this concept or this idea? And that professional community among teachers is just so valuable and would have been lost if we reconfigured.
Let's hear more about that on part 2. Thank you for joining us. Please come back.